The world and an empire that once ruled it lie in ruins. Noble houses that lorded over provinces and commanded vast armies have been reduced to broken city-states. The Imperial Guard, remnants of the Imperial Army, acts as a deterrent to open warfare. The knowledge of the old days has all but been forgotten. Hucksters peddle ancient wares of no value to the ignorant, and the lords seek to hoard artifacts they barely understand. A fanatical mysticism is slowly gaining favor, and long-held resentments are rising to the surface. Some speculate that another war approaches. Others actively encourage it. Times like these bring nothing but suffering for the common man. However, they offer a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to those determined to seize the moment and follow it to riches, power, glory, and often an untimely death. Your adventure starts in Teron, a small, crumbling town far away from the main tracks of travelers and caravans. It's been dying for at least 100 years or so, kept alive only by the combined efforts of its inhabitants. Broken stonework has been replaced by makeshift wooden construction, creating the impression that a new town is slowly emerging from the ruins of the old one. Nothing ever happens in Teron. Here we find Lesbianius, a lore master's apprentice of moderate intelligence at best, and meager skills in everything except throwing sharp objects. Now, just as a quick aside, I'd like to stress how important character creation is in this game. While any archetype can complete the game and resolve most issues, there's always lots of other options to solve any problem. There's never a situation where your type of character can't deal with something. You really do need to think of an archetype when you are building your character, or else you'll be in for some major difficulty. I'd say the easiest builds are the most pure ones, some sort of hyper specialist. This game really rewards specialization, and you'll have the easiest time. Either killing every single enemy, or persuading everyone, or sneaking around every encounter. That doesn't mean multi-role type characters can't do well. As you can see, I diversified Lesbianius here with some useful non-combat skills like alchemy, crafting, and lore. However, the more you try to be a generalist, the harder time you'll have, and at least for this character, I did focus overwhelmingly on combat with just a little bit of diplomatic skills. Starting out the game, I chose a lore master because I think it's helpful for a mostly martial character to pick up some useful secondary skills following this path, especially if I don't intend to fight literally every single encounter, if I want to do something else for anything for some of these encounters. As an apprentice to the local master, Feng, I have access to his house, including some interesting historical documents, which can give me an immediate lore boost. Feng wants us to meet with some merchant and investigate an artifact he's carrying. While our knowledge-based skills are pretty low, we have enough lore to recognize it as a map connecting with someone called Thor a Goth, apparently one of the Elder Gods, who walked the Empire in the distant past, on the eve of its fall. We take the map back to our master to investigate further that and the traitor will never see it again, basically. On our way out, we meet an excited farmer trying to hawk some trinkets he dug up. He shows us a green glowing skull, which he claims is from a long-dead magi, some sort of ancient magician, saying that the glow helps keep ghosts and demons away. We promptly warn him in the best kind of neoclassical language possible to stay away from anything that glows. Again, trying to explain what radiation is in the context of a primitive agrarian society is pretty funny. Even though you know this is radioactive as a player, your character in-game doesn't really have the necessary knowledge to explain what is radiation. So there are a lot of situations where characters are dealing with radiation poisoning, and you can explain it as best you can, but you can never really, get there. We return to Feng so we can examine the map. As far as we can tell, it's genuine, and conveniently, the trader who owned it died in his sleep the next day, so I guess we are the new owners, thankfully. My next task from Feng is to present this map to the local lord and Titus, but not before dealing with another local lore master who's cutting into our business. On the way to meet this man, Cassius, we stop to listen to the storyteller at the inn. He gives us a little bit of a lore dump, describing the Great War and the prelude to the Empire's fall. While the Empire stretched across the known world, It was embroiled in a conflict with a mysterious race of so-called beastmen, as they're described in the story. The Quantari, as they were called upon terrible demons in order to massacre the Emperor's legions. It got so bad that the Empire had to make a deal with some strange godlike beings from another realm in return for their aid. 3 said gods answered the call of the Emperor and the Magi, and apparently they won the war. But all that remains today is a completely ruined land. Again, it's hard to say what exactly these gods even did, or why the world is so devastated, but most likely that is a story for later, and maybe we'll find out more answers later in the game. Meeting with Cassius, we see he's a bit of an idiot. We very easily lure him off to some abandoned shack and have our first fight of the game. Now, the fight is very easy for a mostly martial character such as Lesbianius, and I was sure to pick up some simple armor before fighting him anyways. This is just a taste, however, of the fights to come. I don't believe there are any other really fair fights elsewhere in the game where you're just going one-on-one with somebody. Meeting back with Feng, we ask him for a little detail about his background. He's obviously an Easterner from his look, but he tells us he was formerly a noble in the far-off Eastern Empire of Xin. The world is a lot bigger than most residents of this empire seem to think, but he was politely exiled and has been wallowing in the Western wastelands ever since. He gives us a small boost to a few of our speaking skills as a thanks for our work and also for listening to his story. With Feng's position as the local lore master now secure, we move it on to check out the town a little bit more and look for some work. Picking up some new supplies on the way, we run into a preacher shouting in the town forum. While most of the onlookers are pretty dismissive, Lesbianists take the chance to hear the preacher's message out. While not terribly convincing, we still make a good impression and improve our reputation with these cultists. While wandering around some of the back streets, we encounter a young girl running from what looks to be a mercenary trying to rob her. However, we quickly smell something a bit fishy and grab the girl before she can get away. What was supposed to be a simple pickpocketing job has been reversed into them now getting robbed by me. Lesbianius has a habit, however, of being a little bit too greedy and a little bit too dumb, which is a bad combination. Thus, we end up being cornered again by the gang in some hidden shack somewhere. Graciously, the leader says that we can leave if we like, which we quickly take advantage of. The gang will be here later anyways if we want to come back and kill them once Lesbianius is a little bit stronger. We take some time to upgrade our weapons as well. As I took crafting as one of my major skills, I can use any excess metal to quickly craft some new thrown weapons, as we will be consuming these very quickly throughout the game. Chakrams are a great early thrown weapon due to their high damage and high THC, which means 2 hit chance, and this is an important element of the combat in this game. But their downside is how expensive to craft they are, as they cost about 1 kilogram of metal each to make. And metal is not exactly something you can just get tons of, so it is a lot to be crafting tons of chakrams. These, especially compared to the much more conservative options such as knives, for example, which only cost a tiny little bit of metal. Yet another gang of petty criminals we run into is not so diplomatic, and they give me no choice but to fight. You can see here the typical pattern the rest of the game will follow: outnumbered and totally surrounded by enemies. This fight is not that tough. Our biggest issue being the lack of ammunition, but with all the gear they have left behind, I can craft it into all new throwing weapons. Killing poor people is pretty fun and all, but we seriously need a real job. Lesbianius is way too dumb for the Commercium, and not sneaky or streetwise enough for the Thieves Guild or Assassins, so life with the Legion seems like our best bet. Now, despite being called the Imperial Legion, they're really little more than an organized and well-equipped group of bandits, who seem only really to care about their own power and very little else. Not that I really care, however, as this is my first mission with the Legion, is to impersonate raiders and kill some civilian merchant caravan. Having allies in this battle makes it almost trivial, but to my surprise, when I turn to camp, our commander asks all of the new recruits to fight each other to the death, so only one is left standing, and then the dead bodies can be presented to the Merchants Guild as proof that the Legion is out there fighting bandits. This little cockfight is much more difficult than the merchant encounter, because you're usually wounded from the previous fight, you haven't had time to heal, and it's a three-man free-for-all in a little, isolated little area. But it does help that you can step aside while the other two fight, and being a ranged weapon enjoyer like myself, I just pelt them with poison chakrams until they both die. The Legion is a great place for a warrior to gain some real skills, and already Lesbianius feels a bit more confident to pick some fights around town. One such encounter was with this trustworthy-looking character, Miltiades. He has a business proposition for us. He claims to be a merchant going through some tough times and needs to unload some of his stock of fine artifact weaponry. We oblige him and follow him into an abandoned shack on the edge of town, only to get jumped by two mercenaries. So yet again, Lesbianius is wandering into abandoned shacks, even after he did that to Cassius right at the beginning of his little adventure here. This fight is one of the harder ones, in my opinion, of the early game, as you're stuck in a very tiny room with two fairly strong fighters. I'll be honest, I tried this fight many times before heading to the Legion, was only able to beat it after leveling up a bit more and upgrading my gear. After nearly having you killed, Miltiades has the gall to return and pretend it was all a misunderstanding. More than that, he makes you a fool again by sending another one of his clients to meet with you, hoping that the two of you will fight. Thankfully, Lesbianius is able to talk to the angry noble and talk him down from a bitter resolution, resolving the situation peacefully. We'll meet with Miltiades again later to get the money he promised us, but until then, there's still a lot of unfinished business in Teron before we consider leaving the shithole. For starters, the thieves from earlier, I told them I would leave, but I also thought I would be back later. And while now I've got my Legion armor and much better skills and some weaponry, we can very easily wipe the floor with a lot of them. As an aside, I thought playing a throwing-focused character would be a bit of a meme, but after leveling up a little bit, I found it to be quite a bit more powerful than I really expected. Especially throwing allows for the same sort of targeted strikes as a dagger, but at range. Using a shield as well just makes sense over a dodge build. Lesbianius is shaping up to be practically like an auto turret or like a TF2 heavy. We have a few other non-combat encounters as well. A local noble invites us to his house to investigate some of the ancient technology he has on display. It's quite interesting and lets us use our lore skills, but beyond that I'm not really sure if this has any further purpose beyond world building. We also meet with the Gravekeeper, who gives us a little history of Teron. As the legions of the old empire spread out across the land, they founded many forts in their wake to help with supply. Teron was one such frontier fort, which grew into a major city over time. He also tells us a little about the Dartan family who rules Teron, of their ancient nobility and the former heights of their power, second only to the emperor himself. Well, what a way to fall. Now House Dartan is basically on the brink of being extinguished in the current day. It's a bit sad, really. As a romantic myself, Lesbianius can't really help but feel a sense of saudade, or nostalgic longing for things you will never have. Estou com saudade de você, Teron. We will never know you. Speaking of House Dartan, we still have our mission to meet with Lord Titus and present him with the strange map. This is not so easy, however. If Lesbianius was a stealthier sort, he could use some rope and a grappling hook to climb in, or perhaps impersonate someone in order to pass the guards. But deep down, we want to kill and rack up bodies. The guardsman for the palace, Delar, gives us two possible missions we can take on. First off, a kidnapped noble is being held off by some bandits, and second, a rival house has set up a mining operation somewhere in the mountains nearby. We make our way to both of them, taking on the kidnappers first. Lesbianius is not a very tolerant guy, and he's got a lot to learn about diplomacy. Before the bandit leader can open his mouth for some big autistic speech, we just slice his throat open right there. The rest of the bandits are in shock. Lesbianius' reputation speaks for itself. There will be no ransom. They can choose to either leave or die, and the bandits leave. Delar is impressed with our handling of the situation. Lesbianius is quickly realizing how politics work in the Age of Decadence. Finally, we can have our meeting with Titus. As the Gravekeeper told us, House Dartan is one of the oldest and most storied houses of the former empire, as well as the most martial of the former great houses, supplying more legions than any other house. Likewise, in the Great War, they suffered the most, as nearly all of the empire's legions were wiped out by the Quantari. And Titus is not a man who gives up easily, however, and he's devoted himself to what remains of his power to regaining that lost prestige and returning his house to the foremost spot. And Titus gives us some more lore about the Great War and the Quantari demons, as well as the gods who came across the void to aid the men of the Empire. Most particularly, he mentions Thor-Goth, the subject of the map in question, how he created great artifacts and wondrous machines which the Magi used to great effect. He himself has been searching for the Temple of Thor-Goth for much of his reign, to little success. We'll reshape the world and plant a new seed of a new empire. We'll do away with petty squabbles over broken towns and domains. We will unite our people and give them goals worthy of the banners that once flew over this land. You know, frankly, I like Titus. He's got that big chud energy. And I also feel that everything new is bad and everything old is good. So I can't help but really sympathize with this cause of traditionalism and restoration, alongside owning the libs of House Aurelian. I decide to pledge myself to House Dartan, at least for the time being. And Titus wants us to head to Maadoran to investigate further, but before we do, there's still a little bit more business to finish off in Teron before we leave. First off is heading back to the Aurelian mining operations and having some friendly discussions with the miners. The commander is not a fan of dagger-first diplomacy, and the remainder of the guards are fairly easy to clean up. Lesbianius becomes quite the killing machine and easily dispatches much larger groups, which is helpful since there are at least half a dozen more men in the mine itself. In the end, few men can stand up to a sharpened chakram to the carotid artery. To be honest, this sort of playstyle makes me wish I'd taken a female character to roleplay as Xena, but eventually I'm planning to replace the chakrams with some lighter knives, as they're just too resource intensive to keep crafting en masse. The mind is a very interesting place. This is our first real encounter with the truth of this world, that the late classical society we find ourselves in is actually sitting on the bones of a highly technologically advanced civilization, one which few living today have any conception of whatsoever. Much like in our current reality of the Finno-Korean hyperwar, of our own Earth's deep past. Sadly, Lesbianius is too much of a midwit to figure out anything, so it's time to really move on and just leave these machines to rot here. The final task is a grim one. Regardless of our feelings toward Titus and Imperial restoration, we have to recognize the reality of the situation. House Tertan is just weak, and it barely even controls its own city. And the Legion is getting anxious. Carinus, the commander of the Teron Legion detachment, is fed up with the weakness of Titus and wants to restore order in Teron. And as an avowed legionnaire, we have little choice but to comply with his orders. The mission is to take out all the guard towers in the city and replace them with legionaries, isolating Titus in his castle and putting it under siege. Our Decanus is killed instantly mid-speech, leaving Lesbianius as the highest-ranking soldier about to assault the tower. We decide to raid the tower ourselves and take out its commander while the other men hold off the guards outside. This fight is nothing really special, no worse than anything else we've dealt with previously, and any fight where we're not alone is a good fight as far as I'm concerned. Lesbianius feels bad for his betrayal of Titus' trust, but it had to be done. Either we take the responsibility of doing this, or if we had just left it be, the Legion would have just wiped out Titus and killed him if we had not been there to kind of intervene a little bit. The Legion is just too strong to ignore, and the possibility for some sort of positive outcome for Titus and Carinus to make a deal is a little bit easier if we can at least broker such a deal. And Titus is furious at our betrayal, but he quickly sees the reason in our words. His house is just too weak to make his ambitions reality. But with the backing of the Legion, perhaps it could work. Likewise, while the Legion is strong, it is without the true Imperium necessary to rule, and the Empire would never unite behind a mere legionary warlord with no claim to legitimacy or divine right. In the end, they both managed to see reason, a great diplomatic victory for Lesbianius, and one of our first truly bloodless victories. Now Teron is not only secure, but stronger than ever with the union of the Legion and House D'Artan. We are promoted Centurion for our great service, and must continue our work next in Maadoran, the last great city that remains of the old empire. On our way out of town, we happen to pass good old Miltiades again. We corner him and threaten to cut him open right then and there, but he has something to tell us first.
Lesbianius, I was looking everywhere for you. How was I supposed to know that noble would show up with this man? What was I supposed to do, tell him no? Sure, you could have died, but you didn't. Let's not get sidetracked by hypothetical situations, okay? Let's focus on what's important here. You made a pile of money in what, 10 minutes? Here, 472 Imperials. Feel better now? Listen, let bygones be bygones. Just because things don't go smoothly at first doesn't mean we can't work together. Look at me up in Maadoran. Trust me, it's going to be big. You'll thank me for looking after you one day.
Now, despite the fact that he promised us double that amount, he actually paid us. Lesbianius does feel better feeling the weight of all that gold. Maybe there will be some big changes in the future. There is a huge transformation coming to the Empire, and we will be at the center of that change. Now onto Maadoran, the ruined and radioactive jewel of the Empire. Alright, so that was Act 1 of the Age of Decadence. I will be continuing on with the further acts and continuing the adventures of Lesbianius in this kind of ruined world. My thoughts kind of on the game, just to finish off this video. I actually really like Age of Decadence. It definitely is a very clunky game. The Torque 3D engine is very bizarre to play with. And I find the combat system, while I think the combat system is pretty fun, it definitely is inferior to what came later in the more recent Iron Tower games. For example, the Dungeon Rats game, I really like that one a lot better. I like having the kind of big party you can control. It's a little bit more interesting tactically. And also Colony Ship. I really love their more recent game, Colony Ship. I think if you're interested in an Iron Tower game, I would probably go for Colony Ship first. It's much easier to get into, I find. The story is also really unique and really interesting. I don't really want to spoil anything, but it's a really interesting take on the kind of sci-fi apocalyptic collapse sort of genre, which it seems Iron Tower is a fan of. But it's a really unique setting, really interesting story, and really fun game as well. I mean, Iron Tower games are always great for their combat. Anyone who's interested in Age of Decadence or any other Iron Tower games, I think you really have to have a strong stomach for this type of game. Not that you have to play a combat character, but the combat is really difficult, and you have to be kind of serious about RPGs. Though I think anyone who enjoyed very classic RPGs, which could be very brutal at times, probably you will like this a lot. I think it's definitely worth to play. I've enjoyed it a lot. I've only played through the game one time before, but I've played little bits of it a few times. Definitely, if you really want an easy time in this game, I would say going for a very brutish martial character. Maybe not even what I did with throwing weapons, maybe something just picking axe and taking some very fighting focused skills only. So take an axe wielding, basically heavy armored barbarian with high dodge, and I think you'll have a pretty easy time playing through most of the game. If you want to see more of the story, I would probably go through a speaking-focused lore master character with all the soft skills, because this game you can play through the whole thing basically without fighting, or fighting as minimally as possible, and that's totally fine to do. So that is always an option for people who really don't want to engage with the combat at all. And I think as long as you're kind of intelligent, treat it as just like a choose your own adventure novel, because basically without the combat, that is what this game is. It is just like a choose your own adventure kind of situation, which is pretty funny. But either way, guys, that was Age of Decadence. Really excellent, though often neglected game by a lot of people who are kind of turned off by it, but I really think you should try it out. Everybody, billions must play Iron Tower games. This one, and I also recommend Colony Ship, which is something I've been playing recently a lot, and I really love Colony Ship. So either check out those two. Like I said, I recommend Colony Ship first if you just have never played one of these games before, you're not really familiar with classic hardcore RPGs. Colony Ship is a little bit more forgiving in that they do have at least a difficulty setting where you can play a little bit easier, even though the easy difficulty is not easy. It's about equivalent to what you'd see in other popular RPGs, but compared to the normal difficulty is like night and day difference. But at least that does have the option, unlike Age of Decadence. But either way, either try that out or get used to save scumming. But see you guys next time for part 2, Age of Decadence. Goodbye, guys.